Well, aren't you a regular Nancy Drew?
I learned that from the Nancy Drew detective.
Okay, go.
You think you can follow the clues and solve the case of the missing condiment, Nancy Drew?
Because I've read every Nancy Drew mystery ever written.
Nancy, please tell me you're joking.
Wow, you suck at this Nancy Drew stuff. You should get a new hobby.
My name is Carson Drew, and this is my assistant, Nancy.
Nancy Drew.
It's curtains for you, Miss Drew.
Nancy Drew strikes again.
A regular Nancy Drew.
Well, hello, regular Drews.
Hi, everyone.
We're back again with another episode, this time about Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, The Big Lie.
Yay!
I've been waiting to cover this for so long. I feel like the moment that I saw that a comic was coming out, a Nancy Drew Hardy Boys comic was coming out, I was so excited. And I didn't actually read it right away, but probably a year after is when I actually got it and read it and loved it.
Yeah.
And that was before we even thought about starting this podcast, but I think from the moment that we started this podcast I wanted to cover
Yeah.
this. So I'm really excited.
It's long overdue. I'm sad that I had not read it prior to now because it was so good. Loved it.
But this was your first comic book too, wasn't it, Kori?
Ever. First
Oh my
ever.
God.
Nancy Drew or otherwise. Yeah. So
Oh
it's very new to me, but I loved it so much.
Yeah, how was reading a comic for the first time?
It was fun.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah, I don't know really what I expected, but it makes for a great experience. I mean, getting to see their facial expressions and everything adds to it a lot.
Well, and I feel like just the whole experience of reading a comic book or a graphic novel or whatever is so different because it's not just the text that tells the story. You know, sometimes whenever you're reading something, and because I have a tendency to kind of zoom through things without necessarily taking my time and picking up all of the context of a situation in a book. Sometimes I'll be reading so fast that I'm skimming, essentially.
Yeah.
But when you're reading a comic book or a graphic novel, you can't do that. You don't have the opportunity to do that because there are things that if you don't actually look really thoroughly at the illustration, you could be missing something, or you just may not even understand at all what someone is talking about if you don't see it on the page,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So I love that about comics and graphic novels. It forces me to slow down, but also take my time, but also they are fast reads too. And so it's it's a combination of both of the things I love and that I can finish a story quickly, but also I feel like I'm able to savor it,
Yeah. Oh, definitely. There's a lot of subtext you get from just seeing their facial expressions, how they're how they draw the body language and all. Oh yeah. Big time.
Yeah. Before we get too quickly into The Big Lie, though, Kori, I do just have to tell you something about Kapu Cave.
Okay.
Which is our last episode. And so in the episode, if you guys have listened to that, we kind of talked about how there seemed like there was something missing in the story. And it seemed like maybe Her Interactive have meant to make a different plot, but ultimately because of time or maybe some other kind of constraint, they had to cut the plot short, kind of. Well, just this morning, I saw a video that someone posted on the Nancy Drew PC Games Facebook page. You know what? Let me find it so that I can specifically credit that person. Madeline Kennedy, I don't know if you are a listener or not, but you posted that there was a YouTube video that had all of the optional conversations from Kapu Cave in it. And I watched that because we had talked about that in the episode too. I was like, oh, maybe this will have that conversation that Kori, you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I watched it and there is so much more in there than what I expected. There was an optional conversation with Quigley where she admits that she was spying on Craven for a business.
What?
Yes, Kori. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So literally it's not even something that they cut out of the game.
It's just hard to find.
It's just that they didn't do a good job of like forcing you to have to see it or like
Oh my
talk to
gosh.
people to understand what's going on.
So what happens?
So, I mean, nothing. So she was hired by some pharmaceutical company, which is the number that she has in her notebook or whatever that you find in her trunk. She was
Okay.
hired by them to go and spy on Dr. Craven, and that's what funded her trip to Hawaii. And this is what I was talking about when I was like, why is she in Hawaii? She's in Hawaii because someone hired her to go there to spy on Dr. Craven. And she's talking about how it was like hard to be like it's hard to get money as a scientist unless you like have made some kind of big discovery or something. Yeah. And
so she's not Hawaiian. So she just came there specifically.
Yes. And the whole reason why Dr. Craven trashed her camp was because he found out that she was spying on him. So that's
that
why.
tracks.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm sorry, Her Interactive. You did plan it out. We just didn't find it. Oh my gosh.
Well, I think it's a critique in and of itself that like you could go through that game and not find out that seemingly very vital information to understanding the plot, you know? Yeah. Man. But I saw that, so I just thought I needed to make that clarification for everyone. And also tell you, Kori. So,
well, thank you, and thank you, Madeline. That's very, very informative.
Yeah. Well, the YouTube video itself, let me credit the person who made the YouTube video as well, is from 123 Yellowberry 123 from 6 years ago, and it's optional conversations in the creature of Kapu Cave. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Should have done better research. Oh, well.
I know. Kicking myself because that would have been obviously appropriate for that episode to talk about. So, oh well. But anyway, we're here to talk about the big lie today. More Frank and Joe.
I'm kicking myself about the big lie because I feel like we need to make a small revision to our Drew Crew episode because there are some more Stratemeyer characters that I didn't even realize that Nancy had met. And they're, of course, in this story. So yeah, the Rover Boys, obviously.
Right. Big characters in this. Yeah.
Yes, big characters in this. And I had no idea that they had ever crossed over. So my fault, you guys. Sorry about that, but they should have made it into the Drew Crew.
I was thinking about that too when we were doing our History of the Drew Crew episode and we were talking about when like those people like had crossed over and talking about, I didn't want to spoil anything.
Sure.
And also I didn't remember the extent, not the Rover Boys specifically, but I didn't remember the extent to which like the Bobbsey twins featured in this comic. And so I didn't want to bring it up, you know, but yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, no, just the fact that, the Rover Boys are in it, obviously, but also the Bobbsey twins, the Hardy Boys, Tom Swift is in there. This book may just be everything I've ever wanted. I have to be honest. Plus the noir aspect. Like we've said this a while ago. I've been asking for a noir Nancy Drew story for so long. And this is it.
That's
it's
exactly
so good.
what this is.
So good. Yeah.
In like the very first thing that I wrote down when I was just thinking about like thoughts about this, I was like, obviously this is a noir. This is a noir comic. Like everything about it is noir. It's like dark and gritty. You know what? We may need to put a content warning just at the top of this episode too, that there is quite a bit of murder, violence, talks of suicide in this comic as well. So just know that going in that this is a pretty dark story. So you may not want to listen, and that is totally okay. But yeah. In true noir style, it's all packed in there. So yeah.
Oh, but action-packed it sure is. It's really good.
Oh my God.
Very exciting.
I just have to talk about, I think my favorite thing about this whole comic is Nancy Drew's character design in this.
So good.
I think, okay, I have to tell you this story, Kori, that after I read this comic, I became so obsessed with this like depiction of Nancy Drew that I literally took the comic book to my hairstylist.
No way.
And I was like, this is really weird, but I have this comic book and the character's hair. I need it.
Excellent. I love that. Oh my gosh. Her hair looks so good in this. And she's blonde, by the way.
She's blonde. Thank God she's blonde. But she's also like, she's got like this edge to her. She has
definitely.
multiple ear piercings. Her whole style is, it's definitely like polished and still like rich girl, but it's like, it's not preppy. It's like, it's or preppy with an edge is maybe what I would say it is. But yeah, it's so good. The scene where she puts on the baseball cap.
Oh,
I don't know what it is, you guys, but like this book or this comic was so clearly written by someone who was in love with Nancy, like in love, obsessed with. And I get it. And I love it so much. So much.
Knock me out. Oh my gosh. It's so good.
She plays kind of like the femme fatale role, right? In this noir situation where like the Hardy Boys are kind of our traditional hard-boiled kind of private detective characters, and Nancy is the femme fatale, but she's of course also a detective in her own right in the book. But she's what introduces the Hardy Boys kind of to the case and kind of brings them along. Oh, it's just so good. Also, the narration, or who is kind of the, you know, the focus of each issue changes. So
I like that a lot. Yeah.
We kind of alternate between like Hardy Boys issues, which sometimes can be Frank or Joe, or sometimes a mixture of both Frank and Joe's perspectives. And then we switch to a Nancy perspective and then back. And yeah. And there are 6 total issues of this comic. And then, of course, there is a sequel, which is The Death of Nancy Drew, which I love. Kori, I love. Okay.
Oh, my gosh.
I want you so badly to read it. I know you haven't read it yet. I think I like the second one better than I like the first one. And I love the first one.
Oh, my gosh.
So much.
They definitely, I mean, they wrap up this mystery, but they leave a few threads that it's you have to read the second one. So I'm dying to know what happens next. So I cannot wait to read it. I definitely will be reading it. I just don't know how soon that will be, but hopefully very soon.
Yeah. Something else. So something kind of more general about this is that I think that this comic in particular, you know how I was talking about, I think in the last episode where Caput Cave, where I was kind of curious. I'm like, what is it about Nancy and Frank that do we love so much? Like, why do we love the Francie ship so much? And I think this comic kind of really hit the nail on the head for me and made me understand what that is a little bit better. And I think the thing is that Frank, in all kind of iterations from the 70s show to now, Frank is obsessed with Nancy.
Yeah. Oh, big time.
And not even just in like a love kind of way. Like, yes, obviously he's in love with her, but in like he is fascinated by her as a person.
Right.
And he thinks that she is interesting and cool, and he wants to know her. She's like a magnet to him. And conversely, Nancy is that interested in Frank. She is that obsessed with Frank. He also interests her as a person. And so it's like this dual kind of magnetism that the both of them have.
So good.
And I think the reason why we like that so much is obviously because it's in contrast to Ned, right? She does not have that relationship with Ned. Ned is maybe obsessed with her, but she is not as obsessed with him, right? No. But I think the reason why we like it so much as like viewers or readers or whatever, why we're so obsessed with the Francie ship, is because that obsession and that interest mirrors our own obsession and interest in Nancy and in Frank. And because we share that, we get it. Like, we understand it. And also we want to see that portrayed on screen or in whatever medium, in book or comic or whatever, because we're like, that's us.
Yeah.
That relationship that they have with each other, that's the relationship that we have with them. Like, as individuals, but also as a couple. And so their coupledom, if they ever are a couple, you know, is like the personification of why we love Nancy and why we love Frank or the Hardy Boys, you know?
So well put. Oh my gosh. That's exactly what it is.
So I've solved it. I figured it out, everybody.
I love it. And it helps that there's no Ned in this.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yes. You got to read the next comic, though, because Ned is in the next comic.
Oh, he is?
So,
okay.
Yes, he is.
Okay. Or Bess and George?
I think they are referenced, maybe like partially, but I don't think they take up a big focus. Ned is a character in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
good to know.
yes.
Oh my gosh.
George is in this one. Very briefly, George is in this. Also, George's the portrayal they have of George is quite odd. But we can maybe talk about that when we get there. But yeah.
Also, just speaking of our Drew Crew episode where we talked about all of the CW show characters and stuff, you cannot convince me that the creators of that show did not at least read this before they started working on it. Because this was, March 2017. Yeah. And of course, the CW show was not until 2019. And just so many things pull from that. Not only just like the other Stratemeyer character crossovers, but just the whole kind of more of a darker vibe. The setting, obviously, we're set in Bayport, but like the Hardy Boys working at the lobster restaurant. It's like, okay, that's clearly pulled in from there. And then the whole like Carson Nancy relationship drama where they do not start off on the good foot. Yeah, that just feels exactly like the show. And so it reminded me of all the reasons that I like the CW show are in here as well. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to talk about this cover art, though.
We do.
I'm obsessed.
It's so good. The art is so good, you guys. Oh, so good. I mean, like, a lot of it is, I'm not going to lie, a lot of it is the way that they draw Nancy. I'm just obsessed. But yeah, so the cover art, I mean, there's actually multiple versions. So there's the cover art, but they also have different cover art for each of the issues, right? And there is like an alternative cover art, I think, because what I have is an omnibus here that has all 6 issues in it, and I think that's I think that was all it was published as. I don't know if the issues came out separately or not.
I think at the time you could have gotten them, but I think now that it's completely all 6 are published, you can only get all 6.
But on the cover of this is the cover of the first issue, which is Frank and Joe at like an interrogation table. They're both handcuffed, I think. And then Nancy is... how do you even describe this?
It's like the whole picture is Nancy's silhouette, and then the Hardy Boys are like in the dark areas of the silhouette.
But also like the lights shining down on Frank and Joe in the interrogation room, like the ceiling lights, are Nancy's eyes.
It looks so cool.
So it's literally like she's looking at them, staring at them in this interrogation room while she's like this like big, like larger than life kind of character, observing everything, seeing everything, while they're kind of pawns. And also she's got like the beautiful, like her blonde hair is like swooped over onto one side, and like she has like this off the shoulder black shirt, very femme fatale. So just so good. And then Kori, I don't know if you've seen if you've looked at the other art in the back, the issues, but I think another particular favorite of mine is the number 3 issue cover art with Nancy holding the camera in the car.
I was going to say, it's on the back as well. Little Veronica Mars moment here.
Totally.
It looks exact, because like even in the reflection of the camera lens, you can see the police station and everything. It looks so cool.
It's so good.
I love that.
So good.
Oh my gosh.
It's all good. It's all good. And, so a lot of different artists worked on this comic, but Werther Dell'Edera is who is credited to doing the art in this book on the front cover.
Looks like Faye Dalton did the one on the back where they're at the stakeout.
Yes. So I'm seeing in the front. So the writer was Anthony Del Cole, artist Werther Dell'Edera, colorist Stefano Simeon.
Oh, Faye Dalton did the cover as well.
Yeah. Collection cover artist Faye Dalton, letterer Simon Boland, editor Matt Idelson, assistant editor Matt Humphreys, collection design by Kathleen Hurd. So, we got to talk about just kind of the art in general, too. Because, of course, it's largely noir inspired. It's like dark and moody, like with all these exaggerated shadows. But I think the thing that I love so much about this, and the thing that interests me so much about this art, and you guys, I am not an artist, okay? This is just my opinion, is the colors that they use. I feel like in a lot of noir, of course, we get the darker colors, but the colors that they use in a lot of the illustrations in this are so rich. But they're almost like a version of primary colors, right? They're really rich primary colors, it seems like to me. And so it's just like it's simultaneously bold, but it also kind of feels really nostalgic, you know?
Yeah.
And somehow manages to, like, I don't know, it's just a really good noir comic, you know? I don't know. 3 words?
It has to be noir.
Yeah, one has to be noir. And then I feel like we need to maybe go with, like, guilt.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is a token of, like, noir fiction, but just, like, the concept of, like, someone being guilty versus feeling guilty, and, like, this, like, inner conflict between, like, what is guilt and what is innocence, and, you know, is it our actions that define our guilt or innocence, or is it our motives that define our guilt or innocence? And just, like, a lot of the characters feeling guilty and acting guilty and trying to determine guilt. So I think noir, I think guilt.
That's a good one.
Violence.
What's the word for, like, I don't know. I feel like they have a lot of plans. Like, they come up with a lot of, like, okay, we're going to go schemes, but they're all on exactly the same page, or at least Nancy and Frank are, of, like, when they're like, okay, we're going in, you know what to do. I'm just going to look at you. And then, okay, now we're a go. And then they just put the plan into motion. I feel like that happens quite a few times.
It's instinctive. They're in sync. Yes.
They're in step. Yeah. Scheming somehow. I don't know. But, like, for good. It's not like bad scheming. They're, like, gonna trick the bad guys in some way, but they always have, like, something else up their sleeve at all times,
like a
you know?
hidden agenda, but like, yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
But violence is a big part of it as well. Yeah, it's very violent.
A lot of physical altercations in this. Yeah. Yeah. Or we could just say lobsters.
Lobsters. Yes. Noir, lobsters, crime. There we go.
There we go.
Or guilt, yeah.
Yeah, guilt.
Guilt's a better one, yeah.
Noir, guilt, lobsters.
Perfect.
Okay.
Do you want to start us off with a summary? Yes,
sure.
Let's do it.
Okay, yeah. So in issue 1, we start off, Frank and Joe are in Bayport, which is, of course, their picture perfect, kind of really cute little hometown. But their father, Fenton, was murdered a month ago. So not cute, not fun.
No.
And now Frank and Joe are actually suspected of killing him, which they most assuredly did not do, but the cops think that they did. We kind of enter, and both of them are being interrogated by Chief Colleague, or he's trying to interrogate them, but actually Frank is giving him a quick lesson on how he's doing it all wrong, and using, like, the wrong tack to get him to confess if he were guilty, which he wasn't. But then Chief Colleague just smacks Frank's head on the table to kind of illustrate, like, this is not your game. Like, you don't get to dictate the terms here. And in fact, I don't care what happens to you, and I am going to smash your head against the table, right?
Maybe police brutality should have been one of the
right. That's another one too. But Chief Colleague tells Frank that he thinks Fenton was a crooked cop, and that basically Frank and Joe are the same as him, right? Of his ilk. And then we actually get a flashback of Frank and Joe as kids, and Frank kind of narrates and talks about their somewhat golden childhood, right? And how it was ruined last Thanksgiving when Fenton got arrested for taking bribes from criminals. And that's kind of what kicked off this whole thing. This obviously ruined his reputation, but also Frank and Joe's reputation as, like, the golden boys of the town. Like, they got fired, they lost their girlfriends, like, everyone hated them, and, you know. And then just last month, their mom, who is actually alive in this universe,
is she dead in most of the Hardy Boys things?
I thought so, because I thought it was Aunt Trudy who kind of played their maternal character.
I was wondering that. But then when I was doing our research for the Drew Crew episode, it said that Laura's like present in their lives and they just happen to also have Aunt Trudy there. And I'm wondering if maybe the Hulu show just took some liberties, and maybe I've been thinking this whole time that their mom is dead in canon. But
well, yeah, and I also assumed that their mom was dead because I guess Nancy's mom is dead. And so I thought it was okay, it's just a trope where they just get the moms out of the way.
Right.
So we can focus on our father relationships, I guess. But yeah, I guess maybe, I don't know. Are you looking?
I am looking. Surely they mention it in like the first chapter or something. Yeah, only children of Fenton and Laura Hardy. Family lived in Bayport, small, thriving city. Yeah, so mom's in it.
Yeah, she's a research librarian.
Cool.
Okay, well, yeah.
I'm glad you're alive, Laura.
She's still alive in this one. So last month, she found Fenton dead. He apparently shot himself in the head with his own gun. And they found a suicide note next to him that said he wanted to stop being an embarrassment to his family. So really, really sad, really, really dark. And Frank tells the chief about that night, the night that his father died. And he was actually at a party at Nan and Bert Bobbsey's house. So that's our very first other stratosphere person inclusion, right? We have the Bobbsey twins. And at that, Frank talks about them, actually. We need to talk about their characterization because he calls them spoiled. And like, he says that the party was like so debauched that it was like, it seemed like a frat party. Like it was like a frat house inside of their house that night. Or like some kind of speakeasy, I think he also says, which is really interesting and fun to think about. But at the end of that party, Frank and Joe actually got into a physical fight, which was witnessed by a lot of people. And Frank says that, we just had a difference of opinion. That's what he's telling the chief. And then afterwards, they found out about their father's death, like at the end of that fight. And so that's what broke up the fight. But colleague says that witnesses at the party say that Frank and Joe both disappeared for like an hour in the middle of the party. And so his theory is that Frank and Joe went to the party to establish an alibi, snuck out for an hour to kill their father, and then came back and got into a fight about it. But Frank confesses nothing to colleague. We switch to Joe's perspective, who is in a neighboring interrogation room with this cop called Detective Peterson. And Joe and Frank throughout the comic talk about Detective Peterson as being kind of like bumbling and incompetent. It's like he's like the stereotype of like the bumbling cop, and they don't know how he got this job or whatever. So Joe is not super concerned about this interrogation, but Joe tells him about that night too. He says he was at the party and his friend, Tom Swift, came up to him. Oh, which Tom Swift is also a Black character in this as well. And so I don't know if this is the first time Tom Swift is Black, or if it's like if there's some other originator for that. I'd be interested to know. But so yeah, Tom Swift comes up to him. Oh, also apparently Tom Swift is one of the few kind of people in Bayport who didn't turn against the Hardys when Fenton was accused of being a dirty cop.
Just another reason to love Tom Swift.
I know. He's great in this. I love Tom Swift in this. So Joe says Tom kind of talks in riddles, and it took him a minute, but he realized that he was trying to lead him to this particular room in the Bobbsey's house where Frank was. And so he gets into this room with Frank, and they argue about their dad's guilt. Obviously, Joe thinks that his dad is innocent, but Frank says that he's not sure. And they argue about that. Joe's really angry with like Frank's kind of disloyalty against their dad, and they get into a fight. But then Joe says that, quote unquote, a little birdie came and told him and Frank some interesting things about their father, also about the cop that's interrogating Joe right now. But of course, Detective Peterson doesn't believe him. So Joe's just kind of like, okay, fine, I made it up, whatever. Then afterwards, after they met this quote unquote little birdie, he and Frank got into an argument about this quote unquote little birdie. And then that was actually the physical fight that everybody witnessed at the party. And Joe tells the cop that he knows he doesn't have any evidence on either him or Frank, that there was no fingerprints or DNA at the crime scene. There were no witnesses. And actually, it would have been impossible for either him or Frank to leave the party without someone seeing something. So, he's right. And so both he and Frank are released from police custody. Once outside the police department, Frank and Joe kind of have like this tense exchange and part ways, which is honestly like one of the saddest scenes in this whole comic book. And Joe thinks is like things will never be the same between them again after this. It's gut wrenching when you think about like the really close relationship with the brothers and just the fact that it's like we can't even like be in the same room together anymore.
I don't like them fighting. I don't like it.
And then we see Joe kind of sitting at a diner and he's overhearing people talk about him being a killer and just like gossiping about his family when he gets a text from someone called Birdie to meet him at the Lobster Shack, which is this local restaurant where both him and Frank used to work. And then we switch back to Frank's perspective. He's already at the Lobster Shack, and someone who works there tells him and Joe, who just walks in, that someone is waiting for them in the back. And Frank says that like he hasn't seen Birdie since that night, but she predicted what was going to happen afterwards, after that party, and then what they should do about it. And of course, it turns out that this little birdie is in fact Nancy Drew. And the Hardys say that, hey, we did exactly what you told us to, Nancy. And she says, good. It's the only way that we're going to find out who actually killed your father.
Already off to the perfect start here. See, with the scheming, like she's already got something up her sleeve and we didn't even know it until we meet her. Like, love it.
It's amazing.
So now for the second issue, this one switches over into Nancy's perspective. And we start off with a little bit of flashback from childhood about how she and Frank and Joe originally met, right? So apparently Nancy's family would summer in Bayport when she was a child. And so every summer, the three of them, obviously they were friends. And so they would just be kind of running around Bayport together, solving mysteries. And they would just like come up with like little things to solve for themselves. And it just like ended up being their entire childhood. And it was really sweet and wonderful. But then one summer, her father ended up having to go back to River Heights early. And so she and her mom were just alone in Bayport all summer. And then she ended up getting this mysterious illness. And so she tries to like call Carson or whatever, but by this time it's too late and the mom has already died. This is obviously very hard on Nancy because she had to like go back to Carson like really quickly. And then she and Carson did not have the best relationship at this point. She was struggling a lot, but then they did get closer. And so she and like as growing up as a teenager and everything, she and Carson were really close in her teenage years. And then about 6 months ago, this is the part with George. We meet George really quickly here. She's helping George hack into some ex's email account. I guess George is having some relationship drama right now. But in doing this, she realized, oh, hey, let's hack my mom's old email as well. Just like, remember her, feel a little bit closer to her that way. And so they do. And when she does this, she finds weird old emails from Carson to her mother, which, by the way, her mother is also Kate in this because the email address is like Kate Drew at whatever email. So I love that as well. But so these emails from Carson to Kate are all like really weirdly worded, like, please just forgive me, all this kind of stuff. So clearly something happens. Probably dad cheated on mom. And then that's why he left town early. And then she just didn't have the will to live anymore. And then when she got really sick, she didn't have the will to fight it. And so that's what we know the story from there, obviously. It's really sad. Yeah. So.
Oh, God. I'm not laughing because this is funny. I'm just laughing at how dark this is compared to like our usual Nancy Drew representation. It's like not only does Nancy's mom die also in this universe, basically it's Carson's fault.
Yeah.
Or at least Nancy blames him, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Also, Carson's a cheater, probably.
Yeah, disgusting. I don't want that to be our Carson.
No.
Mm-mm.
I mean, it's not explicit that he cheated on her, but let's read what the
emails say.
What the emails say. Why won't you return my calls? This is killing me. Please call me. It was a mistake. I'm sorry.
He cheated.
Yeah. And Nancy implies that too.
Yeah.
I think she says something like he stepped out on her, which
yeah. Poor Kate.
Although Nancy never really talks to Carson about that, so I don't know. It could be something else.
Interesting. Does that come back in the sequel at all ever? Do you remember?
Okay. I don't remember.
Well, that'll be a surprise for us later. So anyway, also, right after this, or around the time that all the drama started happening with Fenton and being accused of being a dirty cop and everything, guess who was the federal prosecutor for that case? Carson Drew. So Nancy obviously feels very betrayed by this because, of course, Carson was friends with Fenton all those years that she was growing up in Bayport and everything as well. So she tries to cope first by partying, and then she realized that she could instead get back together with the Hardy Boys and try to help them instead. So she's been investigating ever since. Probably a little bit more on the guilt side as well here, bringing our guilt back in, that she feels so guilty that the Hardy Boys are in this mess partially because of Carson, right? So anyway, her investigation led her to the Rover Boys. Very exciting. So if you're not familiar, the Rover Boys are, of course, actually Edward Stratemeyer's very first book series that he started, and then that eventually led him to found the Stratemeyer Syndicate. So these were extremely close to his heart. I believe he said that these were actually like his favorite books that he ever wrote. But those books involved three brothers and their mysteries and everything. But the brothers that we meet here are Ricky, Teo, and Sam. They also all live in Bayport together, and their family runs a chartered fishing boat company. Or at least that's the cover story, because secretly they're like in this like crime ring. They do like gambling and petty theft and all that kind of stuff. So a little bit of a seedier side of town, right? And Nancy thinks that if they're able to like talk to all the criminals in town and everything, they can get more information about who killed Fenton, or at least point them in the right direction of who this bad guy is or whatever. And we learned that the youngest brother, Sam, actually owes his other brothers a lot of money. So he's been running illegal poker games behind their backs to try to like win the money back. But then this cuts into the games that the brothers are trying to set up as well. So it's like, I don't know. It's weird. He's like taking money away from his own business in a way. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
Well, his family business in order to try to like get even with his brothers. Yeah. And
so it's all very underhanded, and they're all working behind each other's backs. But so Nancy enlists Frank and Joe to attend one of these poker games, and then they're going to like, this is another one of their schemes, right? So they've gone in with a plan to like cheat. And then that way, if they win, then Sam will give them information, right? So over the next few days, Nancy starts teaching Frank. I love this so much.
I know.
She starts like coaching Frank and Joe on how to cheat in poker and like teaching them all these tricks for
stacking the deck.
Yes.
Counting
cards.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, Nancy, do you have a class in this? Because this is really great. But yeah, so they're practicing all these things, and then then they go to Sam's boat and try to, get him to let them in on a poker game. He does, and it turns out Sam also cheats a lot in these poker games as well, but not as well as Nancy, and also not as well as she's taught Frank and Joe how to play. So now they are able to out-cheat him in his own game.
So fun.
But unfortunately, at this point, Sam's older brothers show up and start beating Sam senseless for running this poker game behind their backs, or running these multiple poker games behind their backs. And Joe wants to help Sam. It gets a little confusing, but they do clear this up pretty quickly. You understand what they're doing here. Basically, Joe, like, he turns around and like admits to the cheating, which causes Teo to get really, really angry and hold Nancy at gunpoint.
That's the end of issue 2. And issue 3 is narrated by Joe. This is also my favorite issue,
Mhm.
Kori, because it's a heist issue.
Yes.
We'll go there. But so this whole poker game thing, it turns out that actually, like, this was the plan the whole time. I think even Nancy and Joe, like, maybe invited both Ricky and Teo to the poker game in order to kind of out Sam, because their goal was they actually wanted to be able to get to Sam's older brothers, the bigger fish, right? They didn't want to get to Sam, but they didn't tell Frank this. Nancy and Joe kind of did this behind Frank's back, because I think Nancy implies that she doesn't necessarily trust that Frank is dishonest enough to be able to pull it off. Like, she's worried
Yeah.
that he's not going to be able to lie well enough. And so they didn't tell him the whole story.
That's the only thing I didn't like. I'm like,
yeah.
I think we could trust Frank to play it cool. I think he would be able to, like, keep his cover just fine. But
yeah. So Joe ends up telling Ricky and Teo, like, yeah, we cheated Sam, but we didn't cheat him to steal his money. We cheated to show you that we're actually better at cheating than your brother. And so that, like, essentially they're asking Ricky and Teo, like, see, we're better criminals than your brother. You should give us a job. Like, you should employ us. And at first they're, like, not going to. They're like, no, we don't need your help. But when Ricky realizes who they are, that they're the Hardy Boys and that they've been accused of murdering their father, he's like, yeah, come on board. We'll find something for you to do.
Oh, you're shady like us? Come on.
So he says, actually what he says is, he says, we'll consider it. Like, we'll consider accepting your help if you can prove yourselves by stealing some hard drives from the police station. These are hard drives that the police confiscated from the Rover Boys, and we don't know anything about these hard drives. We don't know what's on them. We don't know what it's about, but we obviously can't really ask a whole lot of questions. And I think, in fact, Nancy is, like, done before either Frank or Joe can put up any kind of questions about it. She's just like, yeah, we'll do it.
Mhm.
So, oh my God. So now they have to steal hard drives from the police station. And this is where things start getting really complicated, like emotionally, like morally for our characters, right? Because now not only are they, like, cheating criminals, they're stealing from the quote unquote good guys, right? Like, they're stealing from the cops. So it's like, well, now we're criminals. We really are criminals. Like, but we're doing it to find out who killed Fenton. So we're doing it for a good reason. So is that okay? Is it not okay? Like, these are when the inner questions start happening. But anyway, but Frank is obviously mad at both Joe and Nancy for cooking up this plan behind his back. And to their credit, Joe and Nancy do apologize to Frank for this and say, yes, we'll be all on the same page now moving forward. And Nancy is like, I should have trusted you. That was a mistake. Like, I should have known that you could have handled it. So we're all okay. We're all okay. And we move forward together. But honestly, the entire heist that they do in this issue is really the brainchild of Frank. Like, Frank cooks up this whole plan. So if he was for any reason discounted, he really makes up for it here with his skills. So Frank actually has all of the info from a security audit that Fenton did for the police station before his arrest, obviously. And so Frank has all this security information, and he steals, and what they do, that they cook up this whole plan. And so Frank steals an ID badge from a cop car, while Joe, like, makes a bunch of 911 calls to kind of clog the 911 line and, like, get all of the cops out of the precinct. And Nancy pretends to be a member of quote unquote Geek Speak, which is obviously supposed to be Geek Squad, right? Who the police station contracts their IT needs out to. So Nancy, because everyone is out on these fake 911 calls, Nancy is able to get into the police station without anyone stopping her, pretending to be, someone from this IT company. This is when she puts on the baseball cap, and I love it so much.
So smooth.
And then, she lets Frank and Joe in through the back door, and they use the stolen key card that Frank has to get into the evidence room where they steal these hard drives. But while they're in the process of doing this, they are almost caught by someone else coming into the evidence room. And that someone else turns out to be the federal prosecutor on Fenton Hardy's case, Carson Drew. They're able to hide though, and he leaves and they're able to get out undetected, but it is very dramatic. And Frank and Joe are like worried because Nancy has to go back out the front, right? They're like, oh my God, what if he recognizes her? What if he sees her?
What if he sees her car in the parking lot?
Right.
Like
it's this whole thing. But
oh my gosh.
They get out undetected. And then later they look at these hard drives and they're like, but there's nothing on them, right? Because they want to see what the police took from the Rover boys. But it's just like a bunch of like old video games, which is like really weird. Like, why would the police like confiscate a bunch of old video games from someone? Until who is it that opens it up?
I think it's Joe.
It's Joe. Yeah, until Joe actually physically opens one of these hard drives and inside finds a ton of little plastic baggies full of odorless, colorless powder. So, drugs.
So now Sam, the youngest Rover boy, is hiding from his brothers while he is recovering from having been beaten up by them. So Nancy, Frank, and Joe all go to confront him about the drugs. I think he's got some like safe house or something where he's hiding out in, right? It's the location is a little bit strange, but
it's
they
like on
find
a golf
him
course or something. Yeah. It's like a like some cabin off of some golf course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even a house. It's just like some shed or something that he's hiding out in. And so they find him there and confront him about the drugs. And he explains that, oh, yeah, we actually have another business going on the side where we take all these like scrapped electronics and we realize like, oh, this would be a really good way to smuggle drugs. We could just hide them like in the compartments of these electronics and then people can just order them online. Simple as that. And apparently they were receiving shipments from a supplier, and Sam doesn't know who these suppliers are. It's just two older guys because his brothers don't trust him with that information. So the brothers supposedly know who these people are. But the hard drives themselves were actually confiscated from the post office by the police. So like when they were actually shipping these drugs out, the police got them. Actually, not the police, one police officer in particular, Fenton Hardy. So Sam insinuates that Fenton intentionally stole the drugs from the shipment because he's the dirty cop, right? And Joe gets really angry at this and confronts Sam and like basically accuses him of murdering Fenton. And Sam denies it, of course. But we will later learn that he was actually also at the Bobbsey twins party that night, so he wouldn't have had the opportunity either. Nancy decides, like, okay, this is a great opportunity to leverage Sam and his hate for his older brothers. And she's like, okay, do you want to get back at them, Sam? And he's like, absolutely, yes, let's infiltrate their operation. So they go and return the hard drives to the Rovers just as planned, but without the drugs in them. And the Rovers just like assume that the cops found them, and that's why they didn't have them when they got them out of evidence. And then the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew get to work trying to infiltrate this organization and figure out exactly who's doing what within this operation. They like make friends with the Rover Boys' girlfriends, and they end up kind of working their way up in the organization, just learning more and more about what exactly is going on. So now we've got a situation where they're going to meet up with these suppliers finally. And the suppliers tell them to be at a drug drop location. And so they go and they don't see the suppliers. They just see that like the suppliers just like left, like they just left a package basically hidden, which they sometimes do. And when they like go to this drop and they find this package, they are almost caught by the cops. It's Chief Colleague and somebody else who's with him. And the Rover Boys and the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew are kind of all together right now, but they have to split up to run away from the cops whenever they are. It's like in these like weird tunnels underground. And so they're like running through the tunnels. But they eventually do get away, and then they reconvene after they're like, they get outside of the tunnels. They're outside now. And they realize, okay, how would the cops have known to show up to this? This was such like a weird specific location. Like somebody had to have tipped them off, right? And so they're like, okay, who would have known about this meat to begin with? Who would have been like, maybe like upset about the meat or trying to throw this off? It had to have been Sam, right? Because Sam's the only one that knew but wasn't technically involved, because he would have been mad that the older brothers were doing all this without him, right? And so they're like, all right, let's go find him. Let's go back to his little golf shack or whatever he's got out there and confront him. And when they get there, somebody else has found Sam first because they've shot him dead.
Things really start heating up now. Like, things get really crazy in this next issue, which is the 5th issue. Frank starts off narrating, and he starts talking about, the murder of Sam. And it's pretty obvious that whoever killed Sam was probably also who killed Fenton, right? Because who else would be trying to, like, cover up that, right? Mm-hmm. But the Rovers, so Teo and Ricky say it wasn't them. Like, obviously they were angry with Sam, but Sam's their brother. Like, they weren't going to kill him. And also they wouldn't have killed Fenton, because why would they? Fenton was actually on their payroll. Or I guess he was working for one of their suppliers. So in making sure that, like, everybody at the police force would look the other way. Essentially, he was bribed. So, like, this is literally what Fenton was arrested for, probably, is taking bribes from people like the Rover Boys.
Right.
So they're like, why would we kill him? Like, he was one of ours. He was helping our operation. But of course, at hearing this information, Frank and Joe get into another, like, physical fight, because Joe thinks that the Rovers are lying about this, but Frank is like, I don't know, Joe, maybe we didn't know our dad as well as we thought we did. And so they give them this full page spread of, like, this fight, and it is very dramatic and violent. And Nancy ends up having to intervene. And Joe, who's just, like, fed up with, like, all of this, like, feeling conflicted about acting like a criminal, feeling conflicted about his father, like, fighting with Frank and Nancy being involved in this, just, like, heightening all the stakes or whatever. He just leaves. Like, he's like, I'm done, and he walks away. And when he's gone, Nancy and Frank convince Ricky and Teo that Ricky and Teo should help them catch whoever it was that killed Sam and Fenton. And the only other ones who, like, knew that all of this was happening, that, like, the drug drop off was happening, was the suppliers of the drugs. And so it must be the suppliers who were the ones who killed Fenton and Sam. And so they arranged to meet them that night on the Rover Boys lobster boat. Meanwhile, Joe is off by himself when he kind of just stewing about all of this when he spots Chief Collig. And then Joe kind of gets this hunch, and he doesn't tell us what it is, but he goes to visit his friend, Tom Swift. And Tom Swift is, like, this skilled hacker in this comic, and he's actually also, like, he works at a butcher shop. His dad is a butcher, and he's a vegetarian.
Love it.
Which is just, like, this very, very complex character, right? Mm-hmm. And so Joe gets Tom to hack into the police system, and he notices that the drug raid last night, them catching Nancy, Frank, and Joe and the Rover Boys at that drug drop-off, it didn't go through official police channels. Like, there's no chatter over the radio about it. Like, there's no reports about it or anything like that. So how did Chief Collig know about it? How did they get tipped off that it was happening? So Joe, with Tom's help, manages to follow Chief Collig and switch out his phone. Because he's apparently, Chief Collig is, like, old school, and, like, he doesn't have a smartphone. He has, like, an old flip phone. And so Joe, like, kind of attracts his attention in, like, this crowded street or whatever, and gets Chief Collig to follow him. And then Tom bumps into him, makes him drop his phone, and they switch out the phone.
More schemes. It's so good.
It's so good. And so once they are able to open up the phone and look at it, they see that Collig actually learned about the drug deal from some unknown number. They don't know whose it is. But Tom can tell, though, through some special hacking skills, who knows, where Collig and the number's, like, usual meeting spot is from some kind of, like, GPS location thing. And so he just texts the number and is like, meet me tonight at our usual spot. So Joe goes to this place that night. It's like midnight, it's dark, and it's actually the docks. And he's kind of like looking out across the docks, and who does he see but Frank, Nancy, and the Rover Boys getting onto that lobster boat. So he confronts them all for being there, and he realizes that this means that Chief Collick's contact and the Rover Boys supplier are the same person. And so that person must be who is responsible for Fenton's death and Sam's death too. And just as they are kind of like making this realization all together, they turn and they see that person who's meeting them there arriving. And Nancy recognizes him first because it's her dad. It's Carson Drew.
Yeah, I almost lost consciousness. This. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so Nancy starts freaking out, obviously. We cut to her in the police station with our bumbling detective Peterson, the one who was interviewing Joe at the very start. And she has blood on her hands. And this is like a flash forward from that moment at the docks. And now we'll get kind of a flashback to what actually happened in that scene. So Carson was arriving at the docks, right? And as he like starts walking over to the lobster boat, he was shot. They didn't see who shot him or who had the gun, but Nancy, obviously, seeing this, runs, like sprints over to him, tries to stop the bleeding. Frank and Joe call 911, and then Nancy sends them away because she doesn't want them to be arrested for their involvement in this. So Chief Collick, now we're flashing back to Nancy at the police station again. Chief Collick comes into the interrogation room and tells Nancy that Carson is in critical condition at the hospital right now and is going into surgery. Nancy asks if she can see him, but he's like, no, you got to answer my questions first. Where were you the night Fenton died? And she knows that he knows already that she was also at the Bobbsey twins party. Collick says that he knows that Nancy's dad killed Fenton, that he was working with Fenton and the Rovers distributing drugs all up and down the East Coast. He tells her that Fenton was about to crack and expose Carson's involvement in this, and that's why Carson killed Fenton. And they apparently have files and emails proving all of this, and they have Carson's fingerprints on the gun that killed Fenton and blah, blah, blah. And Nancy is like, well, are you holding me or not? And so they have to release her, basically. And she's not really sure what to believe, but they let her go. She goes to the hospital and meets back up with Frank and Joe outside there. And they tell her, Collick lied to you. Carson's fingerprints were very much not on that gun. They actually had Tom Swift hack into the police records and found that there was actually a mix-up, quote unquote, with the fingerprints. And now the gun itself is missing from evidence as well. And Nancy remembers, that day we snuck in the evidence room to get the hard drives. Carson came in, but why? Yeah. The gun. He must have been taking the gun to prove his innocence. But where would he have put it after he took it? So Nancy goes back to their summer home in Bayport where she thinks that it might be, but somebody else has gotten here first. The home has been ransacked and she cannot find anything. But she remembers the other day she actually met her dad outside of a cafe where she and Frank were eating after Sam was killed. And he was acting really weird. He mentioned something about a sea cave that she and Frank and Joe would play in when they were little. And so she thinks that maybe this was him trying to tell her where the gun is. So she sends Frank and Joe to distract Collick while she goes to search. And the cave is really dark, but there is still an old boat in there. And sure enough, she finds the gun. But then someone starts shooting at her in the darkness, so she has to run off, obviously. And this, of course, must be whoever murdered Sam Fenton and tried to kill Carson. And she almost gets away, but then she is caught by none other than Detective Peterson. Peterson? What is he doing here? Is he not this bumbling idiot that we thought? So yeah, it's him. Surprise. He is about to kill her when Joe comes out of nowhere, tackles him into the water, and Frank picks up the gun. And we learn that they were worried about Nancy, so they followed her, of course. But now there is only one way for them to get the truth, and that is to get a confession out of Peterson. So Nancy gets Frank to start recording, and then she starts to go after him with a piece of driftwood. Oh yeah, this is like a little bit of an intense scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
Upset.
overly upset, about to try to like kill Peterson basically with this piece of driftwood. She's like literally about to hit him with it, and then she stops herself. She's like, no, this isn't me. I'm no better than him if I do this, blah blah blah. She says she's not a monster. He was just in over his head. And then this prompts Peterson's confession, right? He says, yes, I killed them all. I killed Fenton. I killed Carson. I killed Sam. He doesn't know Carson's still alive, I guess. But he was blackmailed to do all this. He doesn't know who these blackmailers are, but they call themselves the Syndicate.
I love it so much. I love it so much. This is obviously a reference to the Stradmeyer Syndicate.
It has to be, yes. Yeah. So good. But then the police come to arrest Peterson. The FBI comes to arrest Colleague because Frank and Joe called them about him, because obviously he's a dirty cop as well. So, mystery solved. Fenton's murder has been cleared. Carson is, going to make a recovery, maybe, we think, hopefully. Nancy still hasn't even seen him in the hospital yet. But their job is not done, of course. We have to find the Syndicate group. Who are these blackmailers, and what interest do they have in Fenton and Carson and the River Boys? But for now, at least, that's all we can do for today. So Frank and Joe go back to their mom, who has a very tearful, hugging reunion for them. And then Nancy gets a cab to go to the hospital to be with her father. And then in the very last panel of the comic, we see a text to someone I think they were actually at the Lobster Shack, right?
Oh, I don't know. Let me see.
Somebody at the Lobster Shack gets a text from Nan Bopsy that says nothing but, they know about us. The end.
Obviously, that's implying that the Bopsy twins are the Syndicate, or part of the Syndicate,
right? They're involved in some way. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good.
It's so good. Your thoughts, Kori?
I loved it.
Truly. It's so good. Like, what's not to love about it? What's not to love about it, Kori?
Truly just the Nancy Carson relationship, and then a little bit of the distrust of Frank at the very beginning with not sure if he could keep his cover or not. Literally, that's the only complaints that I have.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, same. I mean, I love this so much that I'm not even that beefed about her not having a good relationship with Carson in this, which is like a wild thing for me personally to say because of how obsessed I am about the relationship, the portrayal of the relationship between Nancy and Carson. But I feel like in this one, I don't know, we only get like a page of it or whatever, but I think they do a good enough job of illustrating Nancy's childhood and her kind of existing relationship with Carson, and then why it changes. Like, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. Yeah. Like, we get a reason for it, and it's not like, oh, he's lying to me. Oh, he doesn't trust me. It's like, okay, he did something bad, and so Nancy doesn't know how to feel about him anymore. And so she's just pulling away. Like, it's not like they're not fighting all the time. It's not him not being supportive of her. And even like in the scenes where they do get together, he's still being supportive of her. So it's like, I'm not that fussed about it. And I mean, I do think in general, the only thing I don't love is I don't love that all of their parents are kind of being portrayed as criminals.
Yeah.
Because that's what I don't love. I mean, the Carson cheating thing, obviously, I don't love, but maybe he's not cheating. We don't know, right? Could be something else. But Fenton, I think in particular, the portrayal of Fenton is probably what gets me the most. Because
I don't like that he's a criminal.
No, it's pretty clear at the end of it, at least, that he's being blackmailed to be involved in this drug running scheme. And it just does not seem like that's something that Fenton would go along with.
No.
Or at least he would find some way to get out of it, to catch the blackmailers or leave clues or show something that like he was doing more than just that, you know? Because I think we do have situations where Fenton goes undercover. He does that quite a bit, I think. But like we know that he's going undercover,
Right.
you know? We don't know that at the end of this. It just kind of seems like he's in a bad situation and then he gets murdered because of it.
Yeah.
I don't love that. I don't love it because it doesn't make Fenton seem super competent, you know? Whereas I think he has to be for the Hardy Boys to make sense as characters, you know? I don't have a problem at all with them not trusting Frank with that first problem or that first thing that they do with Sam and the River Boys. But that's because I think it really serves to kind of heighten the kind of interpersonal relationship drama that they have going on in this, which like there's not a lot. Like primarily what it is a crime drama. The interpersonal stuff that they have going on is really just subtext.
Right.
But I love the subtext that they have in this.
Great. Yes.
That's something else that I want to talk about because we didn't really talk about it in the summary because it doesn't really make sense to talk about it in the summary of the plot. But really throughout the whole thing, it's pretty obvious to us as the reader and also to Nancy as a character that both Frank and Joe are in love with her. Not just Frank, but also Joe, that like both of them are into her and kind of obsessed with her. And she uses that in order to kind of get them to do what she wants them to do.
That is true. Yeah.
She's very manipulative. Or I wouldn't say very manipulative, somewhat manipulative of that. And like she uses that as a way to get them to like apologize to each other and like work together, which is hilarious. And I love that. I love that portrayal. Like, I mean, Joe, I think is like, you know, hot and cold as far as like his interest in people. So it's like, whatever. I don't particularly feel one way or another about that. But I just honestly, I love the portrayal of Nancy as like being kind of manipulative because it just, there's something about it that feels right. And I know we could talk a lot about like Nancy's like morality and like how that doesn't necessarily fit into her kind of unimpeachable like goodness, her moral goodness. But I don't think it's immoral to know how people view you and then also to use that for good. It's not like she's doing it for bad reasons, right? Like she's trying to find out who killed their father. She's trying to help them have a better relationship. You know, she's trying to do all these things. So and it's not like either of them have asked her out or like conveyed their interest in her in anything. So if anything, she's just kind of using her knowledge of the situation to benefit. I don't think that's morally bad. No. I think we have a lot of assumptions about, or like preconceived notions about, and kind of stereotyping of women who are confident and are, you know, portrayed as being kind of like man-eaters or like
overly seductive,
leading people along or whatever. But I think that removes people's own agency, right? The agency of like men to stop following people. Yeah.
She's not a siren, like
she's not a siren. She's not a mystical creature person. And yeah, she's not romantically leading them along. Like she's not offering them anything except her approval, which is like
fine. So what?
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I think there's a danger that people reading this could be like, oh, this Nancy is kind of like icky, right? But I think that if you read that, if you thought that after reading this, I think that that's maybe a little bit of an anti-feminist instinct view, you know? Like
I didn't feel anything icky reading this. If anything, I was like, yes, let's go, girl. You know exactly what you're doing. And you've thought 16 steps ahead of all the rest of the other characters.
That's
great.
Why it's so satisfying to me is because it's an intelligent Nancy. Oh, yeah. That's why I love it so much. It's like all of it is like her planning ahead, her actually investigating this prior to Frank or Joe, even knowing that it was something to investigate, she's been investigating. And then also her kind of knowledge of their feelings about her is all shows us that this is a very intelligent, very like thinking ahead Nancy Drew. And I love that about her.
All of these schemes had to be pulled off so precisely and be planned out so specifically that, yeah, I would just love to see her pull it off that well.
I do have a question that I feel like I don't think this answered 100%, but I just want to know like where we stand, Kori.
Okay.
So did she tell them to fight at the party? Like, was the physical fight they had engineered by Nancy to make them look like they were suspects?
Oh. That would have been a little bit too far ahead of her thinking, I think. I don't know.
Well, because it happened right after they talked to her. Because what Joe says to Peterson in the interrogation room, he says, we talked to the little birdie or whatever, and she told me very interesting things about my father and also about you, Peterson.
What would she have told about Peterson?
That's another thing, is that I think some of this maybe doesn't make sense. Like some of it is maybe a little bit inconsistent.
Okay.
Because we're not focused particularly on details a lot in this comic. Is really more of like a vibe and a general story.
Which is okay.
Which is okay. But I think some of that is maybe just like put on to make it seem like, oh, we know a lot more at the beginning than we actually do to kind of lure the reader or, into the story a little bit more. So I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's like they meet her at the party, they talk to her, she tells them something, and then at the end of that issue she's like, you did exactly what I asked you to do, you did everything right. But then I'm like, but so what exactly did she ask them to do? Because it doesn't seem like they did anything to be considered suspects in their father's murder, but it seems like that was her goal, right? That was her goal, to get them to be suspects so that they would have time to investigate.
I thought her saying like that you did what I wanted you to do didn't refer to the party, but just what happened in the interrogation room with Frank just like not that talking. He was like antagonizing. Yeah, and just not playing along as well, because he easily could have gone in and be like, this is exactly what happened. I'm so sorry. It wasn't me. Don't think I was, he could have gone in there and like spelled everything out for him. But he was a little bit more, not hostile, but
guilty.
Withholding the information. Like he was almost baiting him into thinking that baiting Colleague into thinking that he was guilty. Yeah. So. Because neither one of them really went in there overly like ready to prove their innocence. It was more,
it could be
not combative, honestly, with the police and like, yeah. So,
yeah. Well, what's the benefit to that in the story? Like, I know we need time to investigate to figure out who killed Fenton.
I just assumed that it was, we need your reputation in town to be this so that the Rovers will trust us now.
That's probably what it is, yeah.
Because then they go to the Rovers like, oh, you are those guys that killed your father. Now we'll trust you a little bit more because we think you're shady as well, kind of a thing. So I think she was planning it all out ahead, but I don't think it goes as far back to the party specifically.
Yeah, so then the fight that they have at the party then, I think Frank says that they were fighting about Nancy.
Oh.
Right?
Because I thought they were fighting over or Frank said that he wasn't sure about Fenton's guilt. Or was that a later fight?
They had the fight about that earlier in the party. But that's not the fight everybody witnessed. They fought about that earlier. They go and they meet with Nancy. Afterwards, they have a fight about Nancy. That's what Frank says. And then they learn about their father's death right after that fight.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then they were physically fighting about something about Nancy. They're both into her.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to know more about what happened at the party. Did they delve more into that in the second book at all?
Oh. Let me just look really quick. Let me see if I can remember, because it's been a while since I've read that too. I don't think so. I don't think we talk about that specific party. And honestly, this story, from what I remember, again, it's been a long time, is a little bit separate.
Okay.
Kind of. But we do obviously expand upon the Bobbsies. Yeah, in general.
Okay.
But I don't know that we talk about that specific party. I can't remember.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Still interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What else? Okay.
I wish the Fitton wasn't actually dead. I wish we'd gotten a plot twist that like, oh, surprise, he had to fake his death to go undercover, something like that. But then, I mean, for the noir stuff, you have to have some darkness. Otherwise, you're not like, you have to have something taken away. So,
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God. I want to say so much to you at the next comic and I just can't.
Yeah.
Biting my tongue. It's so hard. Okay.
Okay. What else do we need to say about this one? Though?
Honestly, I have no critiques. I have nothing really bad to say about it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have some questions. I think maybe there are some really small inconsistencies, but really, really forgivable inconsistencies because I know what they're trying to do. And it's so effective in what it's doing. Like, so effective.
It really is. And it's almost like mind-blowing how well this was done because, I mean, again, I read this so quickly. Maybe it's just because I enjoyed it so much. I wanted to get through it and find out what happened next. But yeah, and I was almost surprised with like how much they were able to cram into the story, despite it feeling like a shorter book. Even though it's not shorter, you can take a long time to get through it if you want to. But
yeah. It's like all the details that they pack into it with all the different panels. Like, seeing like Kate Drew's name or like hearing about Tom Swift, seeing that he's like a Black character, but and seeing like the Bobbsies and thinking about the Rover Boys as criminals. And I don't know. Yeah. There's just 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 all of the detail and all of the consideration, I think, for historical like Nancy Drew like lore or like stratosphere of lore, it's just clearly made by someone who like has a really deep appreciation and just took a lot of care, I think, in making a really good story that like I think a lot of people have been looking for, because we have so many different representations of Nancy under the sun at this point. All of the different series, different TV adaptions, different movie adaptions. We do have some previous graphic novel adaptions, but like very different, obviously. But we don't really have anything that's heavy noir like this. And I love noir, and there's lots of big lovers of noir out there in this kind of mystery genre as an umbrella. And so like, I think this was desperately needed. And so really fits in really well. And just adds like just another layer of coolness for like all of the adaptions that we cover. I'm just so grateful to have it,
Yes, that's exactly it. I was pleasantly surprised by how rich it is. And just the noir style just made it so much better. It was great.
Yeah. Okay. Flashlight score?
I think we have another member of the 5 Flashlight Club right here.
Oh, we sure do, Kori. It is absolutely a 5 flashlighter. If you have not read this, go do it. Go get it. Because like even just if you listen to this episode without reading it first, I'm so sorry. But you still have so much more in store for you. If you haven't read this, like there's so much that like we just can't convey.
Yeah,
right?
There's no way we did it justice, honestly, with the summary. It's just, there's so much.
And like just so much like visually to look at. You've gotta go get it, go read it. And then also, of course, there is the sequel, The Death of Nancy Drew, which we haven't covered yet. So go get both and read both and enjoy that because they're so good, you guys. So good. It's honestly probably maybe my favorite Nancy Drew of all time.
Oh, wow.
Like, considering movies, considering TV shows, video, like the PC games, considering the original mystery text version. Maybe not maybe there's one file that's better than this for me.
Okay.
But like, this is almost as good as it gets for me.
It's really great. Yeah.
So, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're a Nancy Drew fan and you haven't read this, because it's so good.
Definitely agree. Yes. Please excuse us while we go rearrange our entire schedule for the next year to put The Death of Nancy Drew next so that we can read that immediately. Just kidding. We have something else very, very wonderful planned for next, but I am looking forward to doing that eventually. We have to do that at some point.
But yeah. Next up, do we want to talk about what's next, Kori?
Of course, yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, next up, we have another Nancy Drew Hardy Boys crossover. This is a fan favorite. We are doing another episode of the Hardy Boys Nancy Drew Mysteries 1977 TV show. We will be covering season 2, episode 19, Mystery on the Avalanche Express, which is one of our very first episodes with
Janet Louise Johnson.
Janet Louise Johnson. I was going to say JLJ. I was like, I can't just say JLJ.
Yeah.
Janet Louise Johnson, which we've never seen. I've never seen her episodes before. So this will be the first time I've seen that. So
yay.
I'm really excited. Yeah.
It's going to be so cool. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, join us then for that, regular Drews.
Yep. We'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to Regular Nancy Drew. Email us at regularnancydrew@gmail.com.
If you like this episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Regular Nancy Drew and Twitter at RegularND.
You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons at the $3 level vote on upcoming episode topics and get exclusive access to our Scoop Sesh series.
And all patrons receive early access to each episode as well as weekly bonus content.
And to all you regular Drews out there,
thanks for listening.